Hi, I'm Greg Dell and here with Cesar Gavidia, and kind of excited to talk today about Unum Disability Appeals. Unum is clearly the world's largest disability insurance company, and we've handled in excess of 1,000 Unum Disability Appeals. And in this video, I kind of want to do it's more like how do we go about filing a Unum appeal, some tips for people who have a Unum appeal. Some people considered doing it on their own, which they certainly can do, but obviously thousands of people have hired us to do their appeals, and I think by the end of this video they'll understand the reason of how complex and how important it is to submit a very strong appeal. So let's start right there. Why is it so important to submit what I call the best possible appeal that you can, especially when it comes to
what I say, an exhaustive, leave no stone unturned appeal. And the reason is because oftentimes this is your only bite of the apple. Okay, you're not going to necessarily get another opportunity to submit this appeal and the evidence that should be going along with this appeal. Now, if you look at one of my appeals, oftentimes it looks like a legal brief I'm submitting to like an appellate court. There's exhibits, there's sections that are kind of formatted in the style that I would be submitting an appellate brief to a federal court. And why do I do that? Because when that federal judge, if Unum, assuming they continue denying the appeal, once that federal judge gets this administrative record and gets the lawsuit and the motions for summary judgment, they're going to be going through this entire administrative record. And one of the things they're going to find in there is my appeal. And that appeal is going to read like a legal brief that they're used to reading every day, hundreds, if not thousands of these things a year.
Right. So this is your one bite of the apple, and even further is to say that once the appeal decision is done, if you don't win the appeal, and once the insurance company makes a decision, it's really important to understand that if the next day, something horrible happens, you become paralyzed, or so bad that it would be a no-brainer whatsoever you'd be disabled, the court will never be able to consider that, and Unum never needs to consider that. It's just not admissible. It's done. So everything has to go into this appeal. So we've handled appeals for every type of occupation, every type of medical condition, and it seems like almost all of those have obviously been with Unum because statistically, with the amount of claims that Unum has, we've just done a lot with Unum. So let's get right into it about, you get this appeal, you get a denial letter, that's the starting point. You request a claim file. What's one advantage to ERISA, because we usually talk about negatives, is that you get everything. Every single thing that they've seen.
Every note, every record, every piece of information, every email that's gone between them and their medical team or their qualitative reviewers, that Unum uses this different kind of hierarchy apart from other disability insurers, where there's multiple hands or multiple set of eyes looking at your disability claim and determining, well, did we send this person to the right doctor? Did we do the right type of review? Did we consider this record? Did we do that? So they did this in response to a lot of very, very bad press and bad reputation that they had in many, many years past. And so it's a different and more unique approach with them.
So what's great is we have everything. Whatever they considered, they had to give it to us. If they didn't give it to us, then was never considered, and it's nothing that they could be used. Also, what's unique about what we do is the letter we write is not just send us the claim file that they're required to give us by law, but we also ask for a ton of other things like relationships with their third-party companies, how much they've paid doctors, how many claims they've reviewed this year, how many they approved, how many they denied, all kinds of different questions that they rarely ever answer.
The resumes of these doctors.
Right. Things that they rarely answer, but it's ammunition for us for if you get denied that we're saying they were unreasonable in giving us that information and they have a conflict of interest, which we use later to try to get around the standard review, which is another topic not for this video. But it's all stuff that's legal that a claimant would never know, on their own.
Right. If that specific piece of information isn't asked for, they could say, we didn't provide it because you never asked for it.
You'd be forever forbidden from raising that. So you get this claim file. They're often anywhere a minimum 500 pages to thousands of pages, depending upon how long you've been on claim. The medical support is key. What's the first thing medically related that you're digging into the claim file for, looking at?
Their medical team review. Either their nurse case review or their physician case review. And Unum really operates, like I said, a little differently. They may have kind of a general physician review the medical records first and the claim first, and then it may be a more specific doctor later if they feel they need that. So I'm looking for those specific reports first, because that's usually the underlying basis, the reason that Unum's denied the disability claim and you're facing an appeal to begin with, is that they received some piece of information or they had some sort of response from their medical team, from these medical doctors that are in-house, often employees of Unum, or or maybe some doctor that they reached out third party, and they're saying that the records don't support the restrictions and limitations that the insured is either claiming or that their doctor is saying they have.
Right, and then there could be a communication they had with your treating doctors where they sent a letter, they either got a reply, more often than not they didn't get a reply, and therefore that means that your doctor agreed with their doctor's findings.
Right.
So we know
silence is agreement for some reason.
So because they say if you don't respond in 3 days, we assume you agree with our findings.
Right.
So from there, we see all the medical records they review, verify that they got everything that they should have. Maybe they didn't. And then we begin our strategy as to saying, what do their doctors think? What does our client's file look like in terms of how they've been treated? And how are we going to approve upon that? And so that's the strategy medically, which is very dynamic, moving target. That's the reason why they give you 180 days to appeal, is that then when we have a client, we want to build additional medical support. And that can be done through getting new doctors on board, sending out for new additional medical testing we think there should be, getting your treating doctors to review their medical reviews and how they respond to that. And I think the best thing we do is the custom attending physician statements.
Yep.
What are those and why do we do those?
So we've all seen, and if you're watching this video, you've probably seen the forms that come from Unum for your doctors. There's usually 1 or 2 lines under the question is, what restrictions and limitations does the claimant have? So not very much room to describe what the problems are. Okay, that's one thing. So these forms are kind of, more custom to our client's specific conditions. The specific questions have the proper and appropriate room for the doctor to be thorough and expand on whatever limitations that person has, restrictions that person has, the symptoms that person has, and also specific to the person's occupation. Because if you see some of these attending physician forms, it's just a canned form coming from Unum. It's a boilerplate form that's sent out to every single claimant claiming disability. There's no real difference or distinguishing aspect to any of their forms. So our forms are very specific to the person's occupation, to their restrictions and limitations, to their conditions.
Right, and Unum never asks the doctor rarely explains to the doctor the claimant's occupation, and rarely specifically says apply the restriction and limitations to that occupation, as opposed to just do you have restrictions and limitations. Why do they do that? Not because they don't know better, because that's the strategy for denying a claim. Why are we going to get more specific when we can get the ammunition we want out of this doctor and have what they think is a reasonable basis to deny a claim? So that's the medical support. Then you talked about the next thing is it's usually going to be unable to perform the duties of your occupation or the duties of any occupation. So how extensive do we get in presenting the occupation or any occupation and why you can't do those particular duties?
Well, I'd like to get very specific if it's a question of the person's own occupation. All right, so if they're, let's say a dentist, we're getting very specific in terms of the procedures they're performing, the instruments they're using, the time they're spending on their feet, the time they're spending sitting down, the specific maneuvers that they have to make, with their hands, and that type of thing. All kind of comprising their substantial and material duties, okay? If we're looking at the question of whether a person is disabled from any gainful occupation, we've the disability insurance company, not us, but the disability insurance company, by virtue of the insurance policy itself, has expanded the scope of the occupations they could look at to determine whether you're continuing to be eligible for benefits. Okay, so they don't necessarily have to look specifically at your occupational duties. They could look at a wide range of jobs or occupations that are similar to your former occupation, that you may have performed in a prior job or a prior occupation, or that based on your education, training, and experience, you'd be capable, according to their vocational team or their vocational consultant, to perform.
Right. And then, so our job when we're writing the appeal, which we've become very good at doing, is conveying, a lot of times it's not necessarily, it's why can't you sit, why can't you stand, or do you have cognitive difficulties? Why can't you focus during the day? Why can't you process? Why can't you multitask? All the things that almost every job requires. And we have to be able to prove, or if you have pain, all of those things, we have to be able to prove why you can't do those things. Not just that you can sit at a job, but you sit at a desk or something like that, but you can't sit and have the ability to think and do all of those cognitive things. And that has to be brought out through a coordinated effort between your doctors, have to agree with that, and your personal statement, which is another thing we didn't discuss, how we define that. Statements from friends, statements from coworkers, and then getting into also submitting additional medical literature showing that people who have XYZ condition are going to have XYZ difficulties. And that's another whole level of extensive things that we do. So by the time you're done with all these things, between building up the medical, building up the occupation, building up your personal statement, bringing in other statements from other people about what's going on, bringing in medical literature or medical studies if there's things that you think supportive, we end up with appeals. I mean, our average appeal is several hundred pages by the time we're done submitting. And that is an art that we've been doing for years that takes a tremendous amount of skill to be able to do. But what I wanted to ask you, once you submit this whole appeal, what's the strategy instead of telling them what they did wrong? Like, why do you not want to tell Unum what they did wrong?
So the first thing that comes to mind is Unum didn't conduct an independent medical examination or a compulsory medical examination, as we refer to them. That's not necessarily something that I want to highlight or say they should do. Because why give them an opportunity to correct something that they did that was wrong, that could have perhaps been arbitrary and capricious, that is the standard we have to meet to even prevail in this case if it has to go to litigation. So I'm not there necessarily to do Unum's job for them, to plead that they do the right things and take the right steps to find my client disabled. I'm there to prove our case and our burden and provide the medical evidence to them, but not necessarily, correct everything that they've done wrong or highlight every single thing that they've done wrong. Of course, if there's something very egregious that they've done, I think it's important to maybe highlight that. But I'm not there to say you should do this or send my client to this type of consultant or this type of medical doctor.
You see, I've seen the other lawyers, the way they write appeals, or maybe the natural way that people want to respond is to tell the company, you didn't do this, this, and that, you ignored all these different things, and therefore you were wrong. Well, that's a mistake to do it like that. You're not going to give the roadmap to Unum Insurance Company to say what they should do on the appeal, because they may actually follow what you say, and then if they do everything you say, even though they may not come back with the result that you want, what are you going to argue in a lawsuit to say that they acted unfairly or unreasonably in the way they reviewed the claim when they just went ahead and did everything you told them to do?
Right.
So you can't,
and they appear reasonable now.
Right.
Because, they've done everything
and
right.
lawyers send in appeals with tons of case law and all these cases and showing them how they did all these things wrong. Well, that's great. You wrote a beautiful appeal, that looks great on paper and might have been great for court if you were filing an ERISA lawsuit. But don't give the roadmap to the insurance company and tell them everything, because they will likely do what you tell them. So not the way we write our appeals. The idea is we got to present the evidence. We've become almost masters at obtaining the evidence and knowing every piece of evidence that has to be there. And, that's our biggest asset. And that's the reason why you need a lawyer, because unless you've done this before, there's just no way that you could possibly gather every single thing. And you make it so voluminous that they're not really going to review it, because we know they only have so much time on every file. We know what they're going to do internally, how they review it. And they're going to do the same job on every file. Often when they get our appeals, they're so overwhelmed with the evidence that I think it's one of the reasons.
They just follow the same steps they always usually follow. Let's send it to a medical review.
But I think it's more of that one of the reasons that we're successful is they get it and they see that we've been able to provide the evidence that they were looking for and present it in a light most favorable to the claimant, where they lean towards approving the claimant for a Unum, disability appeal. So This was a good, like, just nutshell summary. Obviously, we'd love to dig into your claim based upon your occupation, your medical conditions, discuss how we think we could help you and what's involved in that process to get your benefits reinstated. Feel free to call Cesar or any of the disability lawyers at our firm. We represent clients all over the country. We've sued Unum for claim denials all over the country, always offering a free initial consultation, and we look forward to the opportunity to talk with you.